Well, I spoke yesterday about how it never rains, it pours. I'm not quite sure what the weather equivalent today would be. The news doesn't get much worse, does it? Anyway, welcome to Arsenal Domination. This video, as you can probably expect, is on the news that broke yesterday by the time you're listening to this, but Kai Havertz is out for the season. Adds to the attacking injury woes we've already got, doesn't it? Saka out, Martinelli out, Jesus out. Yeah, it's not good, is it? I don't think anyone's surprised. It's happened. Arsenal took a huge gamble in the summer. They took a huge gamble again in January. The January gamble, arguably worse, given that you knew you had injuries. And here we are. It's undoubtedly a disaster. But we should probably dive into what's next for Arsenal and how we ended up here. So, how did we end up here? I think we probably all know, but I think it's worth recognising the situation. Arsenal now have no recognised number 9. I mean, some people argue that Havertz isn't a number 9. I think he is. I think he's probably more of a false 9, sort of than a sort of out and out number 9. But I think, striker is clearly his best position. He's on for 20 goals this season, or he was. He has 1 in 2 roughly for Arsenal as a striker. And he's going to be a huge, huge loss to us, especially as our other striker, Jesus, is out. Though I do find it odd that people are criticising Havertz and saying, get him out the side, he's not good enough, and now lamenting the fact that he's not there. But it's somewhat understandable given the fact that there is literally nobody else. But I think it's a little bit of... I do find it a bit baffling that they say season's over now, he's gone, given their stance. But hey, that's by the by. But yeah, I mean, I've covered why we're here quite a lot. One of the main factors has been the lack of transfer activity, not just this year, but over the last few years, and the lack of focus on the forward areas. I think that probably, in some ways, makes sense. Over the previous years, as we were building the squad, in the defensive midfield were our bigger issues early on, and Arteta is a more defensive-minded coach, so it does make sense that it was there. But it's definitely a question that Arsenal have not prioritised the attack, and I think that to some extent is on them. I think you can temper that slightly with the fact that we have scored in the last couple of seasons more goals than we have done in any of our other previous seasons in the Premier League. But it's certainly an area of weakness. And look, we all said, I said in the summer, did Arsenal left themselves one attacker light? Definitely so in January, and I think more so the January situation is definitely worse, as I've said previously, because you went into the window with no Saka, you lost Jesus relatively early in the window, and you did nothing about it, and you were asking a heck of a lot of the existing attacking players in terms of minutes in their legs to keep going through, and that's somewhere that Arsenal do have to take into account. I said at the time that money was tight. I think that's been borne out. We're hearing reports in the last sort of 48, 72 hours, last week or so really, since the window closed, from various reputable journalists that part of the reason Arsenal didn't increase their bid for Watkins was because the money wasn't there for them to comply with FFP rules. So that probably gives an indication that my FFP video that I did last month was about right. So a proud moment there for me, but obviously one the way you wish you were wrong and wish that there was a lot more money there. But I don't think, as I said, it excused Arsenal not doing any business. But, there were plenty of players they could have got in on, even if it was a loan. And Arsenal let themselves down there, and therefore they've left themselves vulnerable to this, and it's exactly what's happened. And Arsenal kind of deserve that, given their lack of proactivity in this area. I think the other factors, though, as to why we are where we are the injuries. I think there are an unprecedented amount of injuries this season for Arsenal. I can't remember in 30 years of supporting Arsenal just over a season this bad from an injury perspective. I think there's a few reasons for that. I think one, I touched on it yesterday, too much football being played. Rodri was absolutely right, and a lot of these players haven't really had a much of a break for a very long time. Secondly, I think that because of that you get more injuries, and therefore you are asking more players to play. That snowballs into the fact that Arsenal existing players then are more susceptible to injury, and I think we've seen that in the last week with Martinelli and Havertz going down, having played almost every minute in January. I mean, not quite, but you get the idea, and that does impact them. And I think that has had an effect. And it to some extent it is also a little bit of bad luck. Liverpool have had almost no injuries this season. I think they've had a lot of good luck there. Maybe some of it's made by a bit of rotation, but even then, a lot of their players have played a lot of minutes and somehow have not been injured. Excuse me there. But, that is what it is. Sometimes it happens. Liverpool a few seasons ago had horrific luck with injuries. So it can happen, and I think that is a factor. But I've discussed that enough. I did want to just touch on one thing, though, today, and I've got to give, and I'm just going to quickly look down here because I wrote it down, sorry. Yeah, Red RD was Rory, who I appear on True Gooner podcast with quite often on a Monday. But a really good point today when I was talking to him about that in addition to those things, Arteta probably has been overplaying players. Discussed that some of that is because of circumstances this season. And I think there's something in that to an extent. If you look over the last few years, a lot of players have played a lot of minutes without rotation. So I think to an extent, he does have a really good point here. And I think, Arteta could and should rotate better. But I also think some of this has been about the evolution of Arsenal in the last few years. So if you look over the last sort of 3 or 4 years, I talk about phases a lot. People might not like that, but I think it's reality. When you first start off, you play your best players all the time because your backups are just not good enough to get you where you want to be to improve. We then went into the phase where we started to compete. And then Arsenal, having not won a trophy for so long, all the fans, rightly and understandably, I'm one, want to win a trophy, right? So what do? Well, you play your best players to try and get the trophy. Now, we haven't succeeded in that, but that's what you do. So therefore, the likes of Rice and Saka and Saliba and Gabriel play a lot of minutes, right? And therefore, you get them more susceptible to injury. So it's sort of a catch-22 in many ways. So I do agree with him in some extent, but I also think that that's what most coaches also do. But that's not to say there weren't a couple of opportunities where he could have rested players. If I take Saka, for instance, did he need to play against PSV last season? Did he need minutes in the League Cup last season? No. And they're the times where I think that Rory absolutely has a point, and I think it is a factor in it. But that's just my view on that. But I wanted to credit him with that thought because I thought it was a really good one. So please do go and check out his channel. It's I've got to look at it again. Sorry, Red RD. Please do go and check that out. So that's how we ended up here. I think what next? I think free agents. There aren't really that many options, so I don't think that's something else I'm going to do. My fear is they rush Saka back, but I really hope they don't. But I touched on it yesterday. I think what Arsenal will do is go 4-3-3. Wanyeri on the right, Trossard in the middle, Sterling on the left, and then try and bring youngsters like Butler, Ajoji, or Cabia to get minutes, and maybe Tierney. But there is talk of the 5-3-2, and I touched on that yesterday as well, very briefly. I still don't think that will happen. I think the risk there is you're too defensive, particularly as we're ball dominant. But maybe if we're winning games, that you go to that to sort of get your attacking players off and hold on. Something I criticised Arteta for doing a little bit too much earlier this season, but I think it's probably a needs must now. And I think that's going to be the hybrid of that situation that we will see to the end of the season. And we're going to need goals from elsewhere. There's no question about that. Odegaard, he needs to score more, Rice getting some from midfield and then set pieces. And I think we're going to need all of those things. I think the only positive might be, and bear with me because this is going to sound odd, is that Sterling will now need to play a number of games in a row, right? Sterling has obviously not worked this season. He's not been good enough. But I also think he's a player that plays at his best when he plays regular minutes and plays all the time. So I wonder if a run of games now might actually allow us to see the best of Sterling. We might actually, especially if he scores in their first or second game, see Sterling be more like he was at Chelsea last season where he got 15 goals and assists, and Sterling we've seen at Arsenal this season, which has undoubtedly not worked. I don't know. Let's see what happens, but I think that's one there. But overall, I mean, obviously Arteta's options are limited, and I think this is, my concluding thought here. Arsenal do have themselves to blame. I made this point in a previous video, sort of summing up the transfer window. Jason Ito is the man that will have to bear responsibility for this for me. I'm hearing sort of shouts of sack a lot of them. I just don't agree with that. I mean, firstly, you can't sack the owners. Someone's got to buy them if you want to get rid of them. And I don't see that happening anytime soon. But secondly, I think on the owners, they made the money available for Watkins as much as they could. There's nothing to suggest they wouldn't have done it for another player if a case could be made. I don't blame it on Arteta for this one because he clearly said repeatedly that he wanted strikers or forward options in January transfer window. I don't know how much more explicit he could be. So I think this one has to be put squarely at the feet of Jason Ito. and the gamble hasn't paid off, and it's left us desperately short of options. I think the title's looking a long shot anyway. Liverpool, I still think they're vulnerable. I really do. I think that thought still holds. I think they may well limp to the title somewhat, but I think Arsenal's chances of catching them now are completely gone, because there just aren't the options there, and that's where I say Jason Arteta will have to take responsibility. He's left Arteta really short. But all we can do now is hope that we can find some solutions, hope that we don't get any more injuries. It's been the story of the season. And it's a question of, next man up, to use the American phrase, and hope that some of these kids are going to have to play minutes and can get some goals. But it's not where you want to be. It has left us desperately short. And hey, let's see what Mikel Arteta can do now, because he's going to have to pull something magical out the back. Hugely disappointing. I think the saddest thing is it's not unexpected. And let's see where Arsenal are. So, a bit of a depressing video. I'll be back at the weekend with a lowdown on the Leicester game. But until then, try and stay as positive as you can, guys, I suppose. I'll speak to you soon. Bye.